The Architect of Deceit, the Joseph Goebbels story. Imagine a man who never fired a bullet, yet killed millions. A man who understood that if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. This isn't just history. It's the blueprint for the modern world of alternative facts and digital echoes. This is the story of the limping intellectual who turned a nation's resentment into a symphony of hate. In the industrial grayness of Reit, a small town in the Rhineland, a young Paul Joseph Goebbels walked with a permanent reminder of his fragility. A bout of osteomyelitis had left him with a deformed right foot encased in a heavy metal brace. While other boys played soldier in the woods, Joseph retreated into the world of Dostoevsky, Goethe, and romantic poetry. He wasn't born a monster. He was born a narcissist with a desperate need for applause. At the University of Heidelberg, he earned his PhD in literature. He called himself Doctor, a title he would cling to like a shield for the rest of his life. But in the hyperinflated economy of 1920s Germany, a doctorate in romantic drama bought no bread. He was a failed novelist and a rejected playwright, bitter at a world that didn't recognize his genius. He blamed the elites, the system, and eventually the Jews. A convenient scapegoat for a man who couldn't look in the mirror and see his own shortcomings. The turning point came in 1924. Goebbels heard a man speak in a beer hall. The man was awkward, his mustache was strange, but his voice, it was like a lightning strike. Adolf Hitler didn't just speak, he performed. Initially, the intellectual Goebbels was skeptical. He even belonged to a wing of the Nazi Party that wanted to emphasize socialism over nationalism. But Hitler knew how to play on Goebbels' deepest desire, the need to belong. By 1926, Hitler had won him over completely. Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Adolf Hitler, I love you because you are both great and simple at the same time, what one calls a genius." Hitler gave Goebbels a canvas, Berlin. At the time, Berlin was red, a stronghold of communists and socialists. Hitler sent his little doctor there to conquer the city, not with tanks, but with words and blood. Goebbels realized early on that people are not moved by logic, they are moved by emotion. He turned political rallies into religious experiences. The lighting, he used spotlights to create a cathedral of light. The sound, he made sure the brass bands played until the crowd was in a trance. The conflict, he deliberately provoked street brawls. He would schedule speeches in communist neighborhoods, knowing his brown shirts would fight. Then he used his newspaper, Der Angriff, the attack, to paint the Nazis as the victims. He understood the U.S.'s audience's future obsession with media cycles decades before it existed. He created martyrs like Horst Wessel, a small-time thug whom Goebbels turned into a national saint through catchy songs and romanticized eulogies. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, Goebbels was given a toy no man had ever possessed, the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. He seized the radio. He produced the People's Receiver, a cheap radio that could only tune in to Nazi stations. He understood that if you control the airwaves, you control the truth. He banned jazz, calling it degenerate, and replaced it with Wagner and folk music. In Hollywood fashion, he took over the German film industry, UFA. He didn't just want boring political films. He wanted high-budget dramas, comedies, and romances that subtly wove in the message of Aryan superiority. He was the executive producer of a nation's subconscious. As World War II began, Goebbels' job shifted from selling hope to selling endurance. Even as German cities were being leveled by Allied bombers, he stood in the Sportpalast in 1943 and asked the crowd, "Do you want total war?" The crowd roared, "Yes!" It was a masterpiece of mass delusion. He used the newly invented tape recorder to broadcast Hitler's voice from hidden locations, making the Führer seem omnipotent even when he was hiding in a bunker. But the lies eventually ran out of room. By 1945, the Soviet Red Army was blocks away from his doorstep in Berlin. Goebbels was the man who taught the world that a leader isn't born, he is manufactured. He realized that the German people, broken by the humiliation of World War I and the starvation of the Great Depression, didn't want a politician, they wanted a messiah. He stripped Hitler of his humanity and replaced it with a myth. Through the lens of Leni Riefenstahl's cameras in Triumph of the Will, Goebbels presented Hitler as a god descending from the clouds in an airplane. He choreographed the Nuremberg rallies with such precision that individual identity drowned in a sea of swastikas and torchlight. But behind the scenes, Goebbels was a man of deep contradictions. He was a womanizer who styled himself as a virtuous family man. He was an intellectual who burned books. In 1933, he stood in front of the State Opera House in Berlin as thousands of students tossed the works of Einstein, Freud, and Hemingway into the flames. "The age of extreme Jewish intellectualism is now at an end," he shrieked into the microphone. He wasn't just burning paper, he was cauterizing the German mind. While the United States had Hollywood and the burgeoning world of advertising, Goebbels was the first to weaponize these tools for total state control. He viewed the radio as the eighth great power. He pioneered the technique of the big lie. His philosophy was chillingly simple. If you tell a lie that is so colossal, so audacious, no one would believe that someone could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. He used this against the American public and the world. Through shortwave radio broadcasts like Lord Haw Haw, he attempted to demoralize the Allies, spreading rumors of shipwrecks and internal coups. He understood that the battlefield of the 20th century was not just made of mud and steel, but of perception and frequency. To the German public, the Goebbels family was the ideal Aryan family. Magda Goebbels, beautiful and blonde, was the first lady of the Third Reich, often appearing in propaganda films with their 6 children, whose names all started with the letter H in honor of Hitler: Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Hulda, Hedda, and Heidi. But the perfect home was a facade. Joseph was a serial adulterer. His affair with the Czech actress Lida Barova became so scandalous that Hitler himself had to intervene, fearing it would ruin the moral image of the party. Hitler ordered Joseph to end the affair. Joseph, ever the submissive devotee to his Führer, contemplated suicide before returning to Magda. This domestic tension fueled his work. He poured his frustration into even more aggressive propaganda, turning his personal bitterness into national policy. By 1943, the tide had turned. The German Sixth Army had been annihilated at Stalingrad. The invincible Wehrmacht was in retreat. The German people were beginning to wake up from the dream. Goebbels knew he needed a masterstroke. On February 18, 1943, he delivered his most famous speech at the Berlin Sportspalast. He didn't hide the danger, he amplified it. He told the audience that the Bolshevik hordes were coming to destroy Europe. "Do you want total war?" he yelled. "Do you want it, if necessary, more total and radical than anything we can yet imagine?" The crowd, hand-picked and whipped into a frenzy, erupted. It was a dark magic. He had convinced a dying nation to cheer for its own destruction. For Goebbels, the spectacle was more important than the survival of the people. April 1945. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted only 12. Berlin was a skeleton of a city, haunted by the sound of Soviet Katyusha rockets. Joseph Goebbels moved his wife and 6 children into the Führer bunker, a cramped concrete tomb beneath the Reich Chancellery. Even at the end, he was writing. His diaries from those final days show a man obsessed with his place in history. He believed that if they couldn't win, they should go down in a twilight of the gods that would be remembered for centuries. On April 30th, Hitler committed suicide. In his final will, he appointed Goebbels as the Chancellor of Germany, a title Joseph held for only 1 day. The final horror of the Goebbels story isn't his own death, but the cold, calculated way he and Magda dealt with their children. Believing that a world without Nazi socialism wasn't worth living in, they poisoned their 6 children with cyanide as they slept. Shortly after, Joseph and Magda walked up to the garden of the Chancellery and ended their own lives. The legacy of the architect. Goebbels' body was burned, half-charred and unrecognizable, but his ghost remains. He proved that technology, when divorced from morality, is the most dangerous weapon on Earth. He turned a modern, educated nation into a mob. Today, as we navigate social media algorithms and fake news, the echoes of the little doctor's techniques are still felt. He was the man who discovered that if you control the story, you control the world.
Goebbels understood a fundamental truth about human psychology. A person who is being entertained has their guard down. He seized control of UFA, the German film giant, and became the de facto producer-in-chief of the Third Reich. While he loved glamorous musicals and comedies to distract the public, his most sinister project was the 1940 film Der ewige Jude, The Eternal Jew. Unlike his previous subtle works, this was a documentary designed to strip away the humanity of an entire race. Goebbels supervised every frame. He insisted on editing sequences that compared Jewish people to rats spreading a plague across Europe. The film was shown to SS units before they were sent to the Eastern Front and to school children across Germany. He didn't just want the public to fear his enemies, he wanted them to feel a physical revulsion. By using the modern medium of cinema, he bypassed the intellect and spoke directly to the primal brain. For the U.S. audience, this remains a terrifying example of how media can be used to manufacture otherness. By 1941, the war was being fought on 2 fronts, the physical and the electromagnetic. Goebbels was obsessed with the BBC. He listened to their German-language broadcasts every night, furious that the British truth-telling style was gaining traction among Germans. His response was to create a black propaganda department. He didn't just broadcast Nazi news, he created fake British stations that pretended to be run by disgruntled English soldiers. These stations would play popular American jazz, which was officially banned in Germany, to lure listeners in, only to pepper the music with subtle lies about the incompetence of Winston Churchill. He also utilized William Joyce, known as Lord Haw-Haw, a man with a distinctive, sneering, aristocratic voice who broadcasted from Berlin to the UK and USA. Goebbels delighted in the idea that he could reach into the living rooms of his enemies, planting seeds of doubt about the war's progress while they sat by their fireplaces. In 1937, Goebbels organized one of the most bizarre and effective propaganda events in history, the Entartete Kunst, Degenerate Art exhibition.
He gathered the works of masters like Picasso, Chagall, and Kandinsky, works that the Nazis considered Bolshevik or Jewish, and displayed them in a chaotic, cramped fashion. He intentionally hung the paintings crookedly and scrawled insulting slogans on the walls like "Madness becomes method." He wanted the public to see modern art not as a form of expression, but as a symptom of a mental disease. Ironically, the exhibition was a massive hit. Millions of people flocked to see it, more than the official Nazi-approved art show across the street. But Goebbels didn't care why they came. He used the crowds as proof that the German people were horrified by modernism. He was the first to realize that you can control culture by canceling anything that challenges the state's aesthetic. Throughout his entire career, from 1923 until his final hours in the bunker, Goebbels kept a diary. He didn't write it for himself, he wrote it for you. He wrote with the explicit intention of having these volumes published after the final victory to serve as the definitive history of the Nazi movement. In these pages, we see the true Joseph, a man who was deeply insecure, prone to bouts of depression, and obsessed with Hitler's approval. He frequently wrote about working the masses as if he were a sculptor working with clay. If you tell a lie long enough, it becomes the truth, he mused in various forms throughout his writings. His diaries, recovered by the Allies from the ruins of the Reich Chancellery, serve as a chilling roadmap. They reveal a man who was fully aware that he was a liar. He wasn't a believer who was tricked. He was the magician who knew exactly how the trick worked and took professional pride in how many people he could deceive. In the final weeks of April 1945, as the Soviet organ pipes, rocket launchers, rained fire on Berlin, Goebbels became the director of his own martyrdom. He stayed in the bunker not out of loyalty to Germany, but out of loyalty to the image of loyalty. He saw himself as a character in a Wagnerian opera. He famously told his secretary, "We shall go down in history as the greatest statesmen of all time, or as the greatest criminals." He was comfortable with either, as long as he wasn't forgotten. When he gave the order for his children to be put to sleep with cyanide, he did so with a terrifying coldness. To Goebbels, the children were symbols. If the Nazi world was ending, the symbols had to be erased. He and Magda stepped out into the garden. A single shot rang out, followed by another. Per his instructions, their bodies were doused with gasoline and set ablaze. A final flickering image of the man who had burned Germany to the ground with his words. In 1936, the world came to Berlin. For Goebbels, the 11th Olympiad wasn't about sports, it was a high-stakes psychological operation. He needed to convince the United States and the UK that the new Germany was peaceful, prosperous, and civilized. He ordered the cleansing of the city. Anti-Semitic signs were removed from the streets. The vitriolic newspaper Der Stürmer was taken off the stands in areas frequented by tourists. He even allowed the half-Jewish fencer Helene Meyer to compete for Germany to silence American calls for a boycott. Goebbels utilized the first-ever live television broadcasts and commissioned the filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl to create Olympia. He wanted to capture the aesthetic of the body, linking the ancient Greek ideals to the modern Nazi state. When the African-American athlete Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals, shattering the myth of Aryan supremacy, Goebbels was privately furious, but publicly he maintained the mask of a gracious host. He had successfully sold a lie of moderation to the international press. Goebbels was a pioneer of what we now call social engineering. He realized that to truly control a population, you had to control their environment. He worked closely with architects like Albert Speer to ensure that every public space was a stage for propaganda. He mandated that the Hakenkreuz or swastika be displayed in every shop window, every classroom, and every factory. He created a calendar of national holidays that replaced religious festivals with political ones. There was the day of the seizure of power, Hitler's birthday, and the day of the foundation of the party. He understood that constant repetition creates a sense of inevitability. By saturating the visual field of the German citizen, he ensured there was no mental space left for dissent. If you saw the symbol every day, heard the voice every hour, and sang the songs every morning, the Nazi worldview became as natural as the weather. One of Goebbels' most effective tools for domestic control was the Winterhilfswerk, or Winter Relief Fund. On the surface, it was a charitable organization to help poor Germans with food and fuel. In reality, it was a massive propaganda exercise in national solidarity. Goebbels organized high-profile collections where top Nazi officials, including himself, walked the streets with collection cans. He used the radio to shame those who didn't contribute, labeling them as enemies of the people. This served two purposes. One, surveillance. It allowed the party to see who was loyal and who was hesitant. Two, the in-group feeling. It made every German feel like they were part of a giant, caring family, as long as they conformed. He was the first to realize that virtue signaling could be weaponized by a totalitarian state. As we look at the modern landscape of deep fakes, bot-driven narratives, and polarized echo chambers, we see the fingerprints of the little doctor everywhere. He was the architect of the first post-truth era, and his story serves as a mirror to our own risks in the digital age. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for next video this channel.